Welcome to the third quarter 2025 Indiana FADS Education webinar on Part 2 of the Self-Disclosure Process, Do's and Don'ts. This webinar is designed to provide billing providers with guidance from the Indiana FSSA on the best practices and common pitfalls of the self-disclosure process and will also offer refresher training on the documentation and submission requirements for self-disclosures. The goal is to ensure that all self-disclosure submissions are compliant with processes implemented by the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning, or OMPP, and that repayments are fully supported. This webinar is being sponsored by the OMPP with contributions from Kara Asadi and Lisa Copsey. By the end of this webinar, you should be able to recall key topics of the December 2023 webinar, comprehend the purpose of the self-disclosure process, including which overpayment issues require reporting and what constitutes a complete and accurate submission, identify and follow the correct steps for reporting a self-disclosure, from initial recognition of an issue to submitting the required documentation. Successfully submit a self-disclosure payment by adhering to the established protocols and milestones. Follow the necessary steps and seek guidance from OMPP when needed to ensure the self-disclosure submissions are accurate, compliant, and processed without delays. And confidently and accurately navigate the entire self-disclosure protocol to minimize errors and operational disruptions. Let's begin by revisiting the key topics covered in the December 2023 self-disclosure webinar.
OMPP previously published a self-disclosure provider education webinar in December 2023. However, OMPP has since observed that uncertainty remains regarding the correct process for identifying, completing, and submitting self-disclosures. To address this, we are offering an updated webinar to help ensure that provider self-disclosures are submitted correctly and can be reviewed and resolved as efficiently as possible for optimal outcomes. This follow-on session will equip you with a comprehensive understanding of the self-disclosure process. This process is being enhanced by providing clear guidelines and setting concise expectations for all Medicaid billing providers. Providers are expected to understand the purpose of the self-disclosure requirements, provide complete and accurate information supporting the self-disclosure submission, adhere to the established milestones and protocols to mitigate process delays and ensure compliance, seek OMPP guidance as necessary to ensure the complete and accurate submission of self-disclosure forms and payments. Additionally, we will address frequently asked questions and highlight key takeaways to reinforce your understanding of the material covered and clarify OMPP's expectations of the self-disclosure process. In December 2023, OMPP conducted a self-disclosure webinar, and here are some highlights of what we learned. To clarify the criteria for self-disclosures, OMPP provided examples of issues appropriate for this process. OMPP also provided guidance for accurately completing and submitting the self-disclosure forms. A completed self-disclosure form should include the Billing National Provider Identification, or NPI number, documentation related to the claim and claim details, specifically fee-for-service or non-MCE claims, documentation regarding any third-party liability. Specific claim lines should be notated on the self-disclosure form to indicate which ones need to be refunded back to the state, how the refund was calculated, and contact information for specific department or persons for follow-up questions. Regarding the proper submission of the self-disclosure forms, the provider should wait for the FCO letter to be received before remitting the overpayment check. The self-disclosure forms should be submitted via SFTP, Secure Indiana FADS email, or by providing an encrypted thumb drive. The provider check should be remitted by mail in accordance with OMPP mailing guidelines. Let us now examine the improvements needed to enhance the self-disclosure process. In today's follow-up webinar, OMPP will highlight areas of non-compliance with the self-disclosure process and provide refresher training that builds on the previous education presented. To further support your understanding, the areas of non-compliance relate to the proficiency of reporting self-disclosures, the completion and accuracy of supporting documentation, and proper procedures for the self-disclosure, form submission, and provider payment process. So, what areas can we improve upon to enhance what we have already learned about the self-disclosure process? Improvements can still be made when identifying the appropriate issues for self-disclosure. For example, OMPP continues to receive self-disclosure forms for recent paid claims that should be adjusted or voided in the provider IHCP portal. Also, OMPP is inadvertently receiving self-disclosure forms for credit balance issues. How can we ensure the self-disclosure process is meeting OMPP's expectations regarding the completion and accuracy of the documentation? To begin, the self-disclosure form must tell the story of the issue causing the requirement to self-disclose. Specifically, this means the self-disclosure form must be completed fully, including the billing NPI number, point of contact details, and paid claim information that supports the potential overpayment. Please note there is an emphasis on providing point of contact details for communication, specifically the submitting department's contact name, phone number, and email address. This requirement should be documented in Section 2 of the self-disclosure form. How can we ensure that we are properly adhering to the submission process? This is a two-part process in which the self-disclosure form is first submitted for validation, and once approved by OMPP, the provider overpayment check should be remitted to the state. The OMPP continues to note that provider checks are being prematurely submitted with the self-disclosure form. The most effective way to ensure compliance is for the provider to wait for the OMPP to mail the FCO letter, which confirms the overpayment due. The next slide will outline key do's and don'ts to reinforce compliance with the self-disclosure process. Understanding the key do's and don'ts of this process is essential to resolve issues transparently, while minimizing potential penalties and maintaining organizational integrity. The self-disclosure process for Medicaid overpayment issues involves proactively reporting and addressing identified overpayments to ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. The Do section highlights the following actions. Evaluate the overpayment issue to determine the correct reporting process. Void or adjust claim lines less than 2 years old through the IHCP Provider Healthcare Portal. Include an Excel spreadsheet of the claim line details supporting the identified overpayment issues with the self-disclosure form submission. If there are more than 10 claims being self-reported, the Excel spreadsheet should be an editable and electronic version to allow for a smoother validation process. Wait for the FCO letter that confirms the refund amount due back to the state. Submit the completed self-disclosure form electronically using the preferred method of Secure File Transfer Protocol, or SFTP, or mail the self-disclosure documents to IHCP Program Integrity Address. Provide designated point of contact information and confirm the provider's preferred mailing address for future communications from OMPP. Provide one billing NPI number for each self-disclosure form submitted. The Don't section highlights the practices that should be avoided. Don't report managed care or credit balance overpayment issues using the self-disclosure process. Submit self-disclosures for claims less than 2 years old. Remit overpayment refund checks with the self-disclosure form submission. Submit self-disclosure overpayment issues without including or completing the required self-disclosure form. Submit the completed self-disclosure form directly to the FSSA offices. Provide a general phone number for contact information. This can delay the completion of the self-disclosure process, when the OMPP must resolve questions and issues directly with the knowledgeable provider representative. Omit the billing provider NPI number from the self-disclosure form. Having reviewed the key do's and don'ts for handling Medicaid overpayment issues, it's important to understand how these principles apply in practice. The following slides outline the self-disclosure process and effective implementation of guidelines for reporting and resolving overpayments. When providers do not consistently follow the established self-disclosure process, this lack of adherence can lead to incomplete or inaccurate reporting of overpayment issues. This webinar is designed to address these challenges by clarifying the process. A step-by-step overview enables providers to confidently navigate the self-disclosure requirements. By enhancing issue identification, this enables providers to accurately recognize which overpayment issues require self-disclosure, and by improving reporting accuracy. This equips providers with the knowledge and tools to submit self-disclosures correctly, minimizing errors and reducing operational disruptions. Following this session, providers should have a clearer understanding of the process, be able to identify appropriate overpayment issues for self-disclosure, and report them accurately and efficiently, resulting in a smoother and less disruptive experience for all involved.
In this section, we will provide a high-level overview of the process for self-disclosure. The self-disclosure process described herein is specifically applicable to fee-for-service claims only. Managed care claims are not included within the scope of this guidance. For information regarding the self-disclosure process for managed care claims, please consult the specific procedures established by each managed care entity, or MCE, within their respective plans. The self-disclosure process allows Medicaid providers to proactively notify the IHCP of any inappropriate Medicaid payments they have received and to return those funds. This process serves as a critical tool in the ongoing effort to combat fraud, waste, and abuse within Medicaid programs. By encouraging transparency and accountability, the self-disclosure process supports and enhances the effectiveness of audits and investigations of Medicaid providers, ultimately enabling the recovery of millions of dollars in overpayments that should rightfully be returned to the Medicaid program. It is important to note that failure to self-disclose known overpayment issues may expose individuals or entities to liability under the False Claims Act. In accordance with federal and state law, providers are required to return identified overpayments, making timely self-disclosure both a best practice and a legal obligation. IHCP has a protocol for providers to review and follow to report fee-for-service overpayments that the providers identify. The process for providers to identify inappropriate payments includes the discovery of inappropriate payments received for either Medicaid fee-for-service or Children's Health and Insurance Program or CHIP claims. This issue may come to light through the findings of an audit, whether conducted by the provider organization's own compliance team or by a third-party insurer. Additionally, review of the identified overpayment issues and determination of the appropriate self-disclosure method is essential for accurate reporting. Additionally, it is important to note the process of self-disclosing is required by law, and guidance is provided on the Indiana Medicaid for Providers website for reference. To provide some context, the list on this slide highlights various types of issues that a provider may identify and is required to self-disclose. For example, errors or deficiencies within the provider's billing system that result in overpayments, potential violations of federal, state, or local laws, potential breaches of applicable regulations, potential non-compliance with billing, coding, or other healthcare policies, overpayments related to specific compliance concerns, overpayments that, in aggregate, exceed $1,000, overpayments associated with suspected fraud or legal violations, identification of an employee appearing on the excluded provider list, By encouraging providers to self-disclose, while also establishing a clear mechanism for reporting such issues or errors, the overall effectiveness of IHCP's initiatives to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse will be strengthened. For more information, follow this link to the Indiana Protocol for Self-Disclosures. Now let's talk a little bit more about provider fraud. Provider fraud encompasses any action that meets the definition of fraud as outlined by applicable federal or state laws. This includes a wide range of intentional acts or omissions by healthcare providers, such as submitting false claims, misrepresenting services rendered, or falsifying patient records with the purpose of obtaining unauthorized payments or benefits. By definition, provider fraud is not limited to a single type of misconduct, but rather includes any behavior that violates legal standards and undermines the integrity of the Medicaid program. The Fall 2024 Semi-Annual Report to Congress, or SAR, highlights over $7 billion in expected recoveries and receivables resulting from HHS OIG investigations and audits conducted during fiscal year 2024. The Spring 2025 Semi-Annual Report to Congress cited investigative and audit receivables totaling $3.961 billion. For reference, the link to this website is provided here. The self-disclosure process and provider fraud prevention efforts are closely interconnected, as both focus on identifying and addressing improper payments within the Medicaid program. While the provider fraud detection process is designed to uncover instances of intentional deception or misrepresentation, often through audits, investigations, or data analysis, the self-disclosure process provides a formal pathway for providers to voluntarily report overpayments or potential fraud that they themselves have identified. By working in tandem, these processes help ensure that improper payments, whether discovered internally or externally, are promptly reported, investigated, and resolved in accordance with regulatory requirements. This integrated approach supports program integrity, reduces financial risk, and demonstrates a commitment to compliance and ethical standards. Some examples of provider fraud include falsifying records to receive payment, billing for services not provided, upcoding to charge for higher cost procedures, billing as group versus individual sessions, misrepresenting non-covered services as covered, charging more than public rates, using unqualified or unlicensed staff, engaging in kickbacks or referral incentives. For more information on provider fraud, follow the link to the Indiana Medicaid Providers Program Integrity webpage. Now, let's take a closer look at the reporting guidelines for the self-disclosure process.
The following guidelines detail the procedures and requirements that providers must follow when reporting self-disclosures, ensuring compliance with applicable regulations, and promoting transparency in operations. The Self-Disclosure Protocol, or SDP, is the mechanism providers must use to self-report Medicaid fund overpayments that involve possible fraud, waste, abuse, or inappropriate payment of funds, which they have identified through self-review, third-party insurer audits, compliance programs, or internal controls. Errors or overpayments that are the result of issues with the IHCP claim processing system should not be reported through this self-disclosure mechanism. In addition, credit balance overpayments identified by the provider should be self-reported using the credit balance worksheet and faxed directly to HMS at the phone number provided on the form. For your convenience, the Indiana Medicaid website link to this worksheet is provided. The essential elements of an effective self-disclosure process include the following: timely, conducting a thorough internal investigation to assess the scope and nature of the issue, determining the root cause of the overpayment or regulatory violation to prevent recurrence, promptly developing and implementing a comprehensive corrective action plan to address identified deficiencies, and accurately identifying and quantifying any overpayments to ensure full transparency and compliance. Providers are required to report, return, and explain any overpayment within 60 days of identification, or by the date any corresponding cost report was due, whichever is later. Section 5 of the Self-Disclosure Form also provides guidance related to this requirement. Providers are expected to refrain from including payments with the initial self-disclosure submission until claims are validated by the OMPP and the FCO letter has been sent. Let's take a look at the self-disclosure form found on the Indiana Medicaid Providers Program Integrity webpage. Here is an example of the first of 4 pages of the Voluntary Self-Disclosure Provider Overpayment Form. The self-disclosure form is broken down into a total of 9 sections and includes provider name, contact information, type of self-disclosure overpayment issue, state, federal, or law enforcement involvement, details of the issue, corrective action detail, and the certification statement. Notably, Section 1 requires the provider's billing NPI number to be documented on the self-disclosure form. The billing NPI number is a crucial element when self-disclosing Medicaid overpayments. It serves several important functions in the self-disclosure process, such as it uniquely identifies the provider responsible for the billing, ensuring clarity and accuracy. The NPI number allows the OMPP to trace overpayments directly to the correct provider, which helps prevent confusion or misidentification. Including the NPI number streamlines the review and investigation process, making it easier for the OMPP to access relevant billing histories and claims data. Most federal and state self-disclosure protocols require the NPI number, so providing it ensures the submission is complete and avoids unnecessary delays. The use of the NPI number also helps the OMPP identify patterns or systemic issues, which supports corrective actions and helps prevent future overpayments. Next, let's review reporting guidelines for provider practices that are self-reporting multiple NPI numbers. There are specific instructions for self-disclosure reporting when a provider practice must disclose multiple NPI numbers, as follows. Only one NPI number should be submitted per self-disclosure packet for a provider group. Without the NPI, the self-disclosure is considered incomplete and will be rejected by OMPP and returned to the provider. If multiple providers within a group require a self-disclosure, each billing provider's NPI number must be reported individually, along with the claims associated with that NPI. In the next section, we'll review the process for submitting a self-disclosure.
After identifying the issue and gathering all necessary documentation, the next step is to initiate the self-disclosure process. Let's review the key steps involved in submitting a self-disclosure. When all required documentation is completed and the provider is ready to submit the self-disclosure forms, there will be 2 available submission methods to choose from. The preferred and most secure option is electronic submission using the Secure File Transfer Protocol, or SFTP. To submit your materials electronically, complete the Indiana FAD Secure File Transfer Form to set up SFTP access. Detailed instructions for this process are available in the attached link or on the IHCP website under the Business Transactions section. Submitting via SFTP streamlines the process, enhances data security, and is strongly encouraged. If electronic submission is not feasible, you may mail the completed self-disclosure form and all supporting documentation, excluding overpayment refund check, to the address listed here and listed on informational page 3 under the Provider Responsibilities of the Self-Disclosure Packet. When mailing documentation, it is essential to use certified mail and ensure all files are submitted in a HIPAA-compliant format. If the provider chooses to include an external storage device, such as a thumb drive, the device must be encrypted to protect sensitive data. The password for the encrypted device should not be included in the mailed package. Instead, please send the password separately via email or provide it by telephone to maintain confidentiality. Once the self-disclosure form has been submitted with all supporting documentation, specifically the documentation detailing the overpayment calculations but not including any payment at this stage, an OMPP auditor will begin their review. The auditor's responsibilities include verifying that the self-disclosure form is complete, all supporting documentation for the relevant claim lines has been provided, the reason for the overpayment is clearly explained, and sufficient information regarding the overpayment has been submitted. If, during the review, the auditor finds that information is missing or has additional questions, OMPP will make up to 3 attempts to contact the provider for clarification or to request the missing documentation. It is crucial to identify and provide a specific contact person, as this greatly facilitates timely and effective resolution of any issues that may arise. After the review is complete, the OMPP will issue a formal letter to the provider indicating either acceptance or rejection of the self-disclosure submission. If the overpayment disclosure is accepted, the provider will receive a FCO letter specifying the amount of overpayment owed and detailed instructions for remitting payment. If the submission is rejected, for example, due to incomplete documentation or lack of response after 3 contact attempts, the provider will receive a self-disclosure rejection letter. Key points to remember are: do not submit payment with your initial documentation. Only provide the calculation and supporting evidence. Ensure all required documentation and explanations are included to avoid delays, and designate a knowledgeable contact person to streamline communication with the auditor. Let's look at an example of Sections 5 and 6 from the self-disclosure form. The following sections provide an example of the important elements of the self-disclosure form. In Section 5 of the self-disclosure form, the arrows highlight 2 of the required fields. One of the arrows point to the provider requirement of entering the total overpayment to be refunded. The other arrow points to the provider requirement of entering the dates of service covering the claims identified for self-disclosure. It is important to also point out that the supporting documentation for the relevant claim lines should be provided using a Microsoft Excel format in accordance with Section 6 of the self-disclosure form. The Excel spreadsheet of the claim lines must include the details described in the slide. In addition to these details, it is crucial for the provider to include the claim paid dates for all claim lines supporting the overpayment. Without the claim paid date information, the claim lines identified cannot be properly validated by the auditor. It is imperative that each section of the submission is completed in full prior to submission, with particular attention given to the contact person information. The designated contact should possess a thorough understanding of the issue, including claims processing, and be able to address specific details related to the self-disclosure. Importantly, Section 9 must be signed by the appropriate provider representative certifying that the information is accurate, truthful, and in good faith. It is strongly recommended that providers review the Indiana Protocol for Voluntary Self-Disclosure available online, as it contains comprehensive information and valuable resources to assist with the self-disclosure process. Let's look at some recurring issues with self-disclosure. Now that we have highlighted the self-disclosure process and reiterated best practices and compliance guidelines, let's recap recurring issues that can arise during the process. These challenges often lead to delays, additional follow-up, or even rejection of the submission. As we strive for continuous improvement, here are some of the most frequent self-disclosure process concerns, including incomplete or inaccurate information. Although recent improvements have been observed in this area, the frequent occurrence of insufficient or inaccurate data continues to delay processing, such as failure to use the required self-disclosure form, missing billing provider NPI number in Section 1 of the self-disclosure form, incorrect ICNs, for example, alphanumeric or MCE claim numbers, Although infrequent, providers continue to submit claim numbers, that is ICNs, that deviate from standard Medicaid fee-for-service formats, complicating the validation process. Improper submission methods. Providers are inappropriately submitting recent claims requiring adjustment or voiding through the self-disclosure process rather than directly via the IHCP provider portal, thereby bypassing established protocols. Premature issuance of refund checks. Providers continue to send overpayment refund checks before receiving the final calculation of overpayment, or FCO, disrupting the self-disclosure protocol and potentially causing a need for payment adjustments. By proactively avoiding these common pitfalls, providers can contribute to a more streamlined and efficient self-disclosure process. You may still have questions about self-disclosure. Let's look at some frequently asked questions and answers.
To further assist providers in navigating the self-disclosure process, here are some frequently asked questions, FAQs, that address common concerns and clarify important aspects of the process. For question 1, is there a dollar threshold for reporting? There is no minimum dollar threshold for self-disclosures. Any overpayment amount identified, regardless of how small, must be reported for each National Provider Identifier, or NPI. Even minor discrepancies are considered overpayments and are subject to the same disclosure and repayment requirements as larger amounts. This supports compliance and transparency in all provider transactions. For question 2, we changed our billing system recently, and we had a glitch in the system for several months. It's now fixed. Do I have to go through this self-disclosure process to report the overpayments? If the claim in question is less than 2 years old, providers are required to adjust or correct it directly through the IHCP portal, following the standard claims adjustment procedures. The self-disclosure process should only be used for claims that are more than 2 years old, or when the claim cannot be adjusted through the portal for another valid reason. This distinction helps facilitate claims processing through the appropriate channels, minimizing delays and administrative complications. For question 3, what if my self-disclosure involves several Medicaid entities or providers? Each separate billing provider, National Provider Identifier, or NPI, must be reported individually in the self-disclosure process. For every NPI number, providers should submit a distinct disclosure that includes all claims specifically associated with that NPI. This approach promotes accurate tracking, proper allocation of overpayments, and compliance with reporting requirements. Grouping multiple NPI numbers or their associated claims together in a single submission can lead to processing delays and potential errors, so it's essential to keep each NPI number's disclosure and supporting documentation separate and clearly organized. For question 4, may one check be submitted for all NPI numbers and claim lines once the final calculation of overpayment, or FCO, has been received? Yes, a single check may be submitted to cover the total overpayment amount identified in the FCO letter, even if the overpayment involves multiple billing provider NPI numbers and their associated claim lines. However, it is essential to clearly document and itemize the specific amounts attributable to each NPI number and claim line within the submission. Also, inputting the case numbers in the check memo is helpful. This approach allows the payment to be accurately applied and each provider's records to be properly reconciled. Including a detailed breakdown alongside the check will help facilitate efficient processing and reduce the likelihood of follow-up requests or delays. For question 5, what should I include in the self-disclosure packet for supporting documentation? The provider should include the following at a minimum: details related to the claims being self-reported, including third-party liability documentation, refund amount, and how it was calculated, and provider-designated point of contact information for follow-up questions. Please note that if a third party, such as a billing agency, submits the self-disclosure form on behalf of the billing provider, the provider is still required to designate a point of contact from within their own organization. This ensures adherence to proper protocols and facilitates complete and accurate reporting. Note, including unrelated claims may result in violations of HIPAA regulations. It is imperative to safeguard member privacy in these situations by ensuring that only relevant claim information is disclosed. For question 6, does self-disclosure absolve me of any further claims review from OMPP? The answer is, please note that the IHCP's acceptance of the provider's review results and any overpayment associated therewith does not waive the right to further audit or to conduct an examination of these claims, or any other claims within the time period covered by the provider's internal review process, or the look-back period stipulated in IHCP policy. These claims continue to be subject to review by the IHCP, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Office of Inspector General, other state or federal agencies, or other investigative entities. For question 7, as a provider, what proactive measures can I implement to avoid future self-disclosures? To reduce future self-disclosure risks, providers should strengthen internal controls by separating coding, billing, and payment reconciliation roles, and conducting regular internal audits to catch errors early. Staff training is essential. Offer ongoing education on billing guidelines, payer requirements, and common errors. Implement robust compliance programs with clear policies and confidential reporting channels. Use technology like billing software with compliance checks and data analysis to detect issues. Stay informed on regulatory updates through monitoring and professional forums. Finally, address errors promptly, document corrective actions, and perform root cause analyses to prevent recurrence. These steps foster a culture of compliance and integrity. For question 8, will we get notice of receipt when our self-disclosure payment has been processed? Yes, you will receive an acknowledgement of payment letter from OMPP. For question 9, what circumstances or deficiencies might cause a mandatory self-disclosure submission to be rejected despite the obligation to report? While self-disclosure is a required process for reporting identified overpayments or compliance issues, there are circumstances in which a self-disclosure submission may be rejected by the OMPP. This occurs if the disclosure is incomplete, lacks sufficient supporting documentation. Additionally, if the disclosure does not meet the criteria established by the regulatory body, for example, if the issue reported does not actually fall under the self-disclosure protocol, or if the provider is already under review for the same matter. We also encounter rejections when the provider's designated point of contact is omitted from the self-disclosure form. Without this critical information, we are unable to conduct the necessary follow-up or process the request. Finally, including unrelated or inappropriate claims with the self-disclosure form will also lead to a rejection. Therefore, please ensure all claims are directly relevant to the issue being disclosed. For question 10, what should I do if I am notified that my self-disclosure is rejected? The rejection letter will clearly specify the reason for the denial. If additional documentation is required, the letter will include a mailing address for submission, or you may use the SFTP as an alternative method for sending the requested materials. If you have any questions regarding the contents of the rejection letter or the next steps, please contact OMPP at the email address provided here.
Let's wrap up by reviewing some key takeaways about the self-disclosure process. In summary, there are several key takeaways. Providers have a responsibility to self-report overpayments within 60 days of identification. OMPP's preferred method of communication is for the provider to supply a specific contact name, phone number, and email address. Thorough provider due diligence in verifying the completeness and accuracy of the self-disclosure submission can significantly reduce the likelihood of receiving a rejection letter. OMPP's preferred methods for self-disclosure submission are via SFTP, secure Indiana FADS email, or encrypted thumb drive. Providers should wait until the FCO letter has been received before refunding the overpayment. One payment may be submitted for all associated claim lines and providers' NPI numbers. On this slide, you will find additional references associated with this topic. Additional training courses are available on the Program Integrity Provider Education Training website. Thank you for attending this session. If you have any questions, please email the Program Integrity email address listed here.